It's Our Story. Don Russell, Denver, Colorado.
But I think that had a lot to do with it. When you have adults someplace that has animosity against you, because I remember, it doesn't snow in Mississippi, right? You get a lot of rain and sleet and all of this stuff. I had nurses wagering on whether my mama and daddy were going to show up because they had closed the road from Memphis, from Mississippi to Memphis. They had closed that road, and I was watching the news, okay? And they said the road's been closed. And I was just sitting there, trying to be strong, and they came in there. This one nurse came in and she laughed at me and she said, "They won't be coming to see you today, honey. You'll just be like everybody else here." And I looked at her and I'd watched the news and I said, "You're wrong. They'll be here," right? And I mean, this is an adult to a child, right? And at 5 minutes and 2-hour waiting, thing, and the big thing was to see those big doors open. You were literally behind. I think about how absurd this is today. But those doors we were behind were locked, and at 2 o'clock they would open, and at 4 o'clock they closed behind you. And at 5 minutes to 4, my mama and daddy walked in, and I looked up, and of course, I just said, "Fuck you," and how you can say that. I didn't know those words necessarily, but it was like, "Here's yours, bitch," and it would always be at the end of visiting hours that I would get in trouble. And I think it's another reason I wasn't liked by the kids there. I would get in trouble every time. I'm very emotional, and I think that that's something that goes along with the CP that the doctors didn't bother to tell anybody about, and all of that stuff, and maybe, they didn't know it at the time or whatever, but I deal with things through crying, and anybody that knows me knows that that's what I'm going to do. And now this isn't the manipulation part, okay? Understand, there's a difference, okay? But when I'm all filled with emotion and all of that stuff, I can't do anything but cry. And when I would do that, the head therapist there, her name was Miss Belts, she would try to break me, and she would say that, "I'm going to break you, I'm going to break you." And she would take me, if I didn't stop crying, she would take me into the therapy room and, put me in the bathtub, run the cold water, and submerge my head. And at 8 years old, I said to her, and I do remember it as clear as day, I said to her, and I did say, "Bitch," I said, "You'll have to kill me to shut me up." Okay? And on my 17th birthday, my mom's filled with all this guilt. And I had told them that this was going on, right? And it's my 17th birthday, and my mom's all depressed and all this stuff. And she says to me, she says, "I have a question to ask you." And I'm like, "What's that?" And she said, "That thing that you told me, in Crippled Children's, was that true, or were you just trying to come home?" And I said, "It was true." And she said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "You never have to apologize to me." I said, I'm stronger because of it. And so when my first month at MCIL, this woman named Darla Jones came in. Okay, my boss Deborah introduces me to Darla Jones. And she said, "This is Darla, this is Don Russell." And Darla looks at me and she says, "Please tell me you aren't the Don Russell at Crippled Children's Hospital." And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And she said, we hated you. And I was like, what? And she said, we all hated you. And I said, why did you hate me? And she said, well, you know, when you would be crying and you wouldn't stop and you ended up in the therapy room and Miss Belch was, you know, putting you in the tub? And I said, yeah. And she said, we knew you weren't, you know, gonna quit. And all we knew that was because you were in there raising hell and you weren't gonna give in to her, that she was gonna come out and take it out on us. And so here I am, brand new in this whole crazy thing, and I had someone from my past come back and say that to me. And when I met LaTanya, I said, did you know me? Because I didn't know LaTanya. And she said, yes, I knew you. So that was it. And guess what happened to Miss Belts? She died in a nursing home. Yeah, she died in a nursing home, and I bet some of that same abuse went her way, which doesn't make the person that did it to her any better, but my guess is she got a little taste of that back.
The It's Our Story project is a national effort to make disability history public and accessible. Visit us at www.itsourstory.org or on the It's Our Story project YouTube channel.